In a world that grows louder each day, filled with endless voices, demands, and distractions, there exists a silence we often overlook. This silence is not emptiness, not absence, not void. It is the birthplace of all creation. It is the silence of your true self. To unlock this silence, you must first turn inward. Beyond the chatter of the mind lies imagination, the true language of the soul. What you see, feel, and assume in this inner silence begins to shape the world you walk through tomorrow. Life is not happening to you by accident. It is happening through you from the silence within. Imagination as the voice of the soul, the silence of your true self is not emptiness, it is imagination waiting to be awakened. In the quiet places within, where words dissolve and the noise of the world fades, there exists a vast reservoir of creative power. This silence is not absence, it is fullness. It is the womb of possibility, the unseen workshop where the fabric of reality is woven. To enter into this silence is not to encounter nothingness, but to touch the language of your soul, the language of imagination. Imagination is not a fleeting daydream, nor a child's game of make-believe. It is the power through which every invention, every transformation, and every manifestation first came into being. The skyscraper begins as an image in the architect's mind. The symphony begins as a faint melody heard in silence. The cure, the poem, the revolution, all first existed in a realm unseen by the eye, yet deeply known by the inner vision. When you understand this, you realize that your imagination is not idle. It is the most practical, most real, and most essential faculty you possess. The voice of the soul does not shout, it whispers. It does not demand your attention in the way the world does with its clamor and noise. It invites you inward, asking you to listen in stillness. When you quiet your surface thoughts and rest in awareness, imagination begins to speak. You may not hear words, but you will see images, feel sensations, or catch glimpses of possibilities that seem to come from nowhere. These impressions are not meaningless. They are the guidance of your deeper self, showing you what is possible if you dare to assume it as real. What you dare to assume inwardly shapes the world outwardly. This is not a poetic metaphor, it is the law of life. Every outer circumstance you experience has its seed in an inner assumption. You cannot experience poverty, abundance, health, or illness without first assuming, consciously or unconsciously, the state that aligns with it. Imagination is the soil, assumption is the seed, and the world is the harvest. What you continually nurture in your inner silence becomes visible in the outer stage of life. The tragedy is that many dismiss imagination as fantasy, as unreal. Yet they fail to see that the very life they now call real was once imagined. Think of your own past. Every achievement you now point to, every role you now inhabit, existed first as a thought you dared to claim. Before you held the job, you imagined being capable of it. Before you built the relationship, you imagined the connection. Even before you spoke the words, you imagined the conversation. Life is nothing but the crystallization of imagination. When you begin to embrace this truth, you see that the silence of your true self is not passive. It is dynamic, alive, creative. In that silence, you are not bound by circumstance. You are free. You can assume a state greater than what your senses tell you, and by assuming it, you call it into being. To imagine yourself healed when the body is in pain, to imagine yourself free when circumstances seem binding, to imagine yourself abundant when the evidence declares lack. This is the voice of the soul speaking reality before reality takes form. Many people say, I cannot imagine myself differently. I cannot see beyond what I already am. And yet, imagination requires no proof from the outer world. It is its own proof. The very fact that you can imagine something means it exists in potential. The moment you accept it inwardly, the laws of life begin their quiet work of aligning the outer world with your inner state. You do not need to know the how. The silence knows. You need only persist in the assumption that your imagination is not a dream but a decree. To listen to the voice of your soul is to trust imagination above appearances. This requires courage because appearances are loud and insistent. They tell you what is while imagination tells you what can be. Appearances speak to the senses, but imagination speaks to the heart. When the two contradict each other, you must decide which voice to follow. The world you know today is the result of following the voice of appearances. The world you could know tomorrow will be the result of following the voice of imagination. Imagination is not limited to personal gain. It is the key to transformation at every level. When you imagine peace in the midst of conflict, you create a space where harmony can take root. When you imagine unity in the face of division, you contribute to a vision larger than yourself. When you imagine beauty in what appears broken, you begin the work of renewal. The voice of the soul is not selfish, for it knows no separation between self and other. Whatever you imagine for yourself, you inevitably imagine for the world is but the extension of your inner life. There is a sacred responsibility in this. To misuse imagination is to fill the silence with fear, doubt, and limitation, and these two become visible. But to use imagination wisely is to speak life, abundance, and truth into being. You are always imagining, whether consciously or unconsciously. The question is not whether you are using imagination, but whether you are using it deliberately. To sit in silence and listen for the voice of your soul is to reclaim your creative power. It is to realize that imagination is not a tool you occasionally employ, but the very essence of your being. To imagine is to be alive, to participate in creation itself. The silence within you is the canvas, imagination the brush, and your assumptions the colors with which you paint the world you inhabit. Inner silence is creation, not void. When you turn away from noise and outer distractions, you touch the silence that creates reality. This silence holds infinite possibilities. Most people misunderstand silence. They see it as absence, as emptiness, as nothing happening. Yet silence is not the lack of creation. It is the origin of creation. It is the invisible ground from which everything visible springs forth. Every sound you hear arises out of silence, and every word you speak returns to it. The silence itself is never gone, never diminished. It simply waits beneath the surface, the still foundation behind the noise of life. When you learn to rest in that inner silence, you do not escape life, you discover the very source from which life emerges. Silence is not void, it is fullness. It is the hidden potential from which form is drawn, the unmanifest reservoir from which your reality is shaped. Think of the seed buried in the earth. To the eyes, the soil appears empty, lifeless, still. But beneath that stillness, an entire process of creation unfolds. The silence of the earth is not passive, it is fertile. In the same way, your inner silence is not the absence of activity, but the womb of transformation. What seems to be stillness is actually the field of infinite possibilities waiting to take shape according to the state you assume. The outer world thrives on noise. Endless chatter, constant stimulation, distractions designed to pull your attention outward. You are told to measure your worth by what you hear, what you see, what others say, what circumstances dictate. Yet the true creative act is never found in noise. Creation always begins in silence. Every idea you have ever acted upon first appeared in a moment of stillness, when your attention turned inward. Even the great movements of history, the revolutions, the discoveries, the breakthroughs, all began when someone dared to step away from noise long enough to listen to the silence of possibility. Silence is not empty, it is alive. It contains the shape of worlds not yet formed, the outlines of futures not yet lived. When you enter this silence, you stand in the place of creation itself. Here, imagination is free to speak without interruption. Here, your assumptions are planted into the soil of being. And here, the unseen begins to move toward the seen. Many avoid silence because it feels uncomfortable at first. Without noise, they feel naked, exposed, uncertain. But this discomfort comes from identifying only with the outer world. The more you learn to rest in inner stillness, the more you realize that silence is not your enemy, but your true companion. It is the place where your deepest self lives, where your most authentic desires are heard, where your most powerful visions are born. The paradox is that what feels empty to the surface mind is actually overflowing in truth. Outer noise is shallow, it changes from moment to moment, like waves on the ocean. Inner silence is deep, it is the ocean itself. Outer noise distracts you with appearances. Inner silence reveals to you the substance behind appearances. To live only in noise is to live in reaction. To live in silence is to live in creation. When you sit quietly and withdraw attention from the clamor of the senses, you begin to feel the richness of this silence. It does not need effort. It does not need striving. In fact, the moment you stop trying, silence reveals itself naturally. Within it, ideas appear unforced. Insights rise without struggle. Possibilities unfold without pressure. You realize that silence is not passive. It is the most active force in your life, for it creates the conditions by which new realities are born. This silence is infinite in its scope. It does not dictate limits. It does not tell you what cannot be done. In silence, everything is possible because nothing has yet taken form. When you touch it, you stand at the threshold of pure potential. Here you can select the state you wish to occupy, and by dwelling in it, you impress it upon the silence itself. The world outside will eventually echo what you have dared to create within. Consider how often the noise of the world tells you, it is too late, you cannot, this is impossible. These voices come from limitation, from fear, from repetition of the old. Silence does not speak in such terms. Silence says only, what do you choose? It waits for you to bring forth the assumption you wish to live in, and once chosen, silence gives it life. To engage with this inner silence is to realize that creation is not separate from you. You are not a spectator of life waiting for conditions to improve. You are the origin of conditions. What you assume in silence becomes your experience in noise. What you nurture in silence grows until it takes shape in the visible. This is why it is said that silence holds infinite possibilities. It is never exhausted, never diminished, never bound by what was. Silence is not the denial of the world, it is the renewal of the world. To withdraw into it is not to abandon responsibility, but to claim responsibility at the deepest level. It is to recognize that the outer is only the shadow, and the inner silence is the substance. When you live from silence, you stop chasing appearances and begin shaping them. You stop reacting to circumstances and start creating them. The more you practice turning towards silence, the more you feel its power. At first it may seem intangible, but gradually you notice how ideas become clearer, desires more defined, faith stronger. You notice how the things you once struggled to achieve begin to unfold more naturally. The silence begins to reveal itself as the truest form of activity, the activity of creation, invisible yet unstoppable. In silence there is no struggle, there is no noise of opposition, no distraction of doubt. There is only being, and in being lies all becoming. The silence within you is not void. It is creation itself, eternal, patient, abundant, waiting only for you to listen and to choose. Assumption precedes experience. Your world mirrors your inner state. Assume quietly in the silence of self, and the world has no choice but to reflect it. This is not a poetic exaggeration, but a law of life, subtle yet unwavering. Every circumstance you face, every condition you encounter, is but the shadow of an assumption once held, whether consciously or unconsciously. To understand this is to see that assumption is not a passive thought, it is the seed of experience. Assumption is more than wishing or hoping. Wishing leaves reality unchanged because it does not claim its desire as true. Assumption, however, steps into the feeling of fulfillment before evidence appears. It declares, inwardly and quietly, this is so, even when the senses scream the opposite. By assuming a state as already real, you give it form in the invisible realm, and once formed there, it must eventually clothe itself in visible experience. The world you walk through each day is a mirror, showing you what you have dared to assume within yourself. Look at your life carefully, the relationships, the opportunities, the challenges, the patterns that repeat. None of these are random. They are reflections, outward projections of the inner states you have most consistently occupied. This is why change so often fails when attempted only at the outer level. Rearranging circumstances without shifting assumption is like trying to alter a reflection in the mirror without touching the face that casts it. To assume quietly is to enter the silence of the self, beyond the noise of doubt, beyond the questions of how or when. In this silence, you accept as true what you desire to experience. You do not argue with appearances, nor do you wrestle with the logic of possibility. You simply rest in the inner, knowing that assumption precedes experience. Just as the seed precedes the harvest, just as thought precedes word, so too does assumption precede manifestation. The power of assumption is subtle because it works invisibly. No one can see you assume, no one can measure the inner state you occupy. Yet over time, the world around you rearranges itself to match it. People appear, opportunities align, conditions shift, all in response to the quiet decree of assumption. What seems to others like chance or coincidence is nothing more than the reflection of what you already accepted in silence. This principle can be unsettling, for it leaves no room for blaming external forces. If your world mirrors your inner state, then the source of change lies not outside but within. To accept this is to accept responsibility for your experience. It is to realize that you are not at the mercy of fate, luck, or circumstance, but that your assumptions silently shape every detail of your life. What you hold as true within yourself, whether noble or limiting, generous or fearful, must inevitably appear without. Consider how often people assume lack, assume rejection, assume failure. They rehearse disappointment inwardly long before it arrives, and when it does arrive, they call it reality. Yet it was not reality that imposed itself. It was the assumption quietly planted, quietly nourished, that brought forth its own fulfillment. In the same way, when one assumes abundance, assumes love, assumes success, the world must reflect those inner states. It cannot do otherwise, for assumption is creative, and experience is its echo. To live by this law is to become deliberate about what you assume. No longer do you let random thoughts or inherited beliefs dictate your inner world. Instead, you choose carefully the state you occupy. If you desire harmony, you assume harmony. If you desire freedom, you assume freedom. If you desire health, you assume health. You do not wait for evidence to permit the assumption, for assumption does not follow experience, it precedes it. By assuming now in silence, you summon tomorrow's reflection. This is why quiet assumption is so powerful. It is not loud affirmation, not desperate effort, not anxious repetition. It is the gentle acceptance of a state as true. It is a calm resting in the reality of what you desire, without strain. In this quietness, assumption sinks deeply into the silence of self, where creation begins. Like a seed planted in fertile soil, it requires no struggle. It only requires faith that what is assumed inwardly must become visible outwardly. Notice how your body responds when you truly assume. When you assume success shifts, your posture shifts, your tone changes, your decisions align. When you assume failure, your energy collapses, your choices limit themselves. Assumption colors not only thought but action, not only imagination but behavior. And the world responds accordingly, matching the state you have embodied. There is a rhythm to this law. First comes silence, then assumption, then reflection. Just as the painter begins with a blank canvas, you begin with silence. Into that silence you project the image, the feeling, the assumption of the state you desire. And in time, the outer world becomes the canvas upon which your assumption is displayed. To expect otherwise is to confuse cause with effect. Assumption is cause, experience is effect. The mirror does not change first, the face changes and the reflection follows. What then is required of you? It is to be bold enough to assume what you desire, even when appearances deny it. It is to persist in the inner state despite contradiction. It is to hold fast in silence, knowing that the world cannot resist the law that governs it. For assumption, once fully accepted, sets creation in motion. The details of how and when are not your concern. The law of reflection handles those. Your task is only to assume, to dwell in the feeling of fulfillment, to occupy the state until it becomes natural. Assumption precedes experience always. To forget this is to live as a victim of appearances. To remember it is to live as the author of your world. Every new experience waits for its assumption. Every reflection waits for its face. The silence of your inner life holds the script, and your outer life performs it. When you assume quietly, without doubt, without strain, the world has no choice but to mirror it. The present moment is the door. The silence of self is not in some distant future. It is now. By resting in the awareness of being, you align with the reality you wish to live. The mind, however, is restless. It wanders to the past, replaying old failures and victories, and it projects itself into the future, hoping, fearing, waiting for some imagined condition. Rarely does it pause in the stillness of now, and yet the now is the only doorway through which creation flows. The present moment is often dismissed as too ordinary, too small, too fleeting to matter. But this moment is everything. It is the meeting point of eternity and time, the place where thought becomes form, the arena where imagination quietly seeds the world to come. There is no power in the past, for it has already crystallized. There is no power in the future, for it has not yet arrived. The only power you will ever hold is in this immediate awareness of being. When you rest in the awareness of now, you discover the silence of self. This silence is not reached by straining or forcing. It is entered by simple recognition. The moment you pause and say within, I am, without attaching anything to it, you touch the foundation of all creation. This I am is not a description of your current circumstances, but the essence of being itself. It is the doorway through which you step into the reality you wish to live. Many wait for circumstances to change before they dare to feel differently. They say, when I succeed, I will feel confident. When I am loved, I will feel worthy. When I have abundance, I will feel free. Yet this is an inversion of the law of life. Experience does not precede feeling. Feeling precedes experience. The present moment is not a prison, but a portal. By assuming now the state you desire, by resting in the awareness of already being what you seek, you set in motion the reflection of that state. The future you long for cannot arrive outside of the present. It must be born here in the silence of now. Every imagined tomorrow begins as a state assumed today. To delay assumption until circumstances change is to wait endlessly, for circumstances themselves are only mirrors of the inner state. The door is not in some distant future. It is here, in the stillness of this moment. Resting in awareness does not mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging with life from the center rather than from its periphery. Most people live scattered, pulled in every direction by noise, by demands, by fears. Their attention is split between regrets of the past and anxieties of the future, leaving little energy to create in the present. But when you gather your attention and rest it in now, you discover a clarity that was always waiting beneath the surface. The silence of self emerges, and in that silence, You choose with intention the reality you wish to align with. This alignment is not achieved through force. You cannot wrestle reality into submission, nor can you manipulate the future through worry or control. Alignment happens the moment you accept now as the creative moment, by embodying the state you wish to live, by feeling it as present, real, and alive. You bring yourself into harmony with it. The world outside must then mirror that harmony in time, for the outer always follows the inner. Think of how often the present moment is overlooked. You rush to complete tasks, to reach goals, to move from one condition to the next, all the while waiting for some future point to grant you permission to be at peace. Yet peace is only ever here in this breath, in this stillness, in this silent awareness of being. To postpone it is to chase an illusion, for when the future arrives, it arrives only as now. The future is nothing more than a series of present moments, and if you cannot enter the silence of self here, you will not find it there. To rest in awareness is to anchor yourself in being, not in becoming. Becoming always belongs to time, to the endless pursuit of what is not yet. Being belongs to eternity, to the fullness of now. When you shift from becoming to being, from striving to resting, you discover that everything you sought was already contained in the silence of self. You do not need to wait for love to appear before feeling loved. You do not need to wait for success to arrive before feeling successful. You do not need to wait for freedom to come before feeling free. The moment you assume these states now, you align yourself with the reality in which they are expressed. This does not mean ignoring present circumstances. It means refusing to let them dictate your inner state. Circumstances are echoes, shadows of past assumptions. They are not the source of power. The source lies in the present awareness of being. When you rest there, you withdraw attention from the old echo and direct it toward the new assumption. In silence, you accept the state you wish to live, and in time, the echo must change to match it. The present moment is the door because it is always open. You do not need permission to enter it. You do not need preparation to step through it. The door is never locked, never withheld, never delayed. Only your attention can keep you wandering in past or future, blind to the doorway before you. But the moment you turn inward and rest in the silence of being, you see it clearly. You stand at the threshold of creation, and by the state you assume now, you determine the reflection that will greet you tomorrow. To live this way is to stop waiting. It is to recognize that everything begins here, in the stillness of now. The silence of self is not a destination but a presence, not something to be reached later, but something to be acknowledged now. And as you rest in this awareness, you begin to feel the truth that the present moment is not small, not ordinary, not fleeting. It is infinite, expansive, creative. It is the only place where life is lived, and it is the only place where reality is shaped. A faith as inner hearing. Faith is not a blind hope. It is the inner conviction that what you hear in silence is already true. Hold to it until it becomes flesh. The common idea of faith often reduces it to waiting for something uncertain, a vague optimism that circumstances might improve if luck or chance intervenes. But true faith is far more profound. It is the capacity to hear the silent word within and to accept it as reality, even before it is visible. This inner hearing is not with the physical ear. It does not depend on sounds that travel through air or vibrations that touch the body. Inner hearing is the soul's recognition of truth. It is that moment in silence when you hear yourself addressed, when an inner assurance whispers that what you have claimed is already so. The outer world may contradict it, the senses may deny it, yet within the voice of conviction remains steady. Faith is listening to that voice, not once but continually, until the unseen becomes seen. When you close your eyes and step into the stillness of imagination, you may hear words not spoken aloud. You may sense a conversation that has not yet taken place, or receive the echo of gratitude for something not yet delivered in time. This is inner hearing. It is the experience of listening to the reality you have chosen as if it were already present. To those who do not understand, it seems like fantasy. To those who know, it is creation in its earliest stage. Faith requires persistence. The voice within does not always shout, it often speaks softly. If you turn your attention outward too quickly, the louder voices of doubt, fear, and evidence will drown it out. But when you remain in silence, attuned to that inner hearing, you strengthen it. Every time you return to it, every time you replay the inner sound of fulfillment, you carve the state deeper into your being. And as it becomes more real inwardly, it begins to take form outwardly. Think of how a song stays with you after you have heard it. Even when no instrument plays and no singer performs, the melody repeats in your mind. You hum it, you feel it, you carry it with you. Faith works in a similar way. You hear the truth of your assumption inwardly, and then you carry that sound within you wherever you go. It becomes the background music of your life, shaping your choices, directing your actions, and eventually calling into form the very thing you have inwardly affirmed. Faith is not wishful thinking. Wishful thinking looks at circumstances and hopes they will change. Faith looks beyond circumstances and declares the change already accomplished. Faith is not concerned with how or when. It does not bargain with conditions or measure possibilities. It rests in the conviction that what has been heard in silence is already real, already established, already waiting to be expressed. This is why faith is often misunderstood. To those who live only by appearances, it seems unreasonable. They say, "How can you believe when there is no evidence? How can you claim what you cannot see?" But faith does not wait for evidence to appear before it acts. Evidence appears because faith has already claimed. The unseen always precedes the seen. The inner word always comes before the outer expression. What you hear in silence is not less real than what you see in noise. It is more real, for it is the cause of what will appear. Faith as inner hearing demands focus. It asks you to turn away from the outer voices that speak limitation and to listen instead to the inner assurance that speaks possibility. These voices may conflict. One may say, "You cannot," while the other whispers, "You already are." One may shout, "It is impossible," while the other calmly repeats, "It is done." To which voice you give your attention is the measure of your faith. To listen again and again to the voice of fulfillment, until it becomes louder than doubt, is to live by faith. When you practice inner hearing, you step into the reality you wish to live, not as a future hope, but as a present truth. You hear the gratitude of one who has received. You hear the laughter of one who rejoices. You hear the confirmation of conversations already accomplished. And as you hold to this inner sound, the world arranges itself to match it. The people you meet, the opportunities that appear, the conditions that unfold, all seem to conspire to bring about the state you have already accepted inwardly. Faith is the bridge between silence and manifestation. It is the faculty by which you treat the inner hearing as the truest evidence, even when the outer world has not yet shifted. To live this way is to live anchored in a deeper reality, one not swayed by appearances, not tossed about by delay. You know what you have heard within, and you hold to it until it becomes flesh. This does not mean ignoring outer life or pretending circumstances do not exist. It means refusing to let them define the final word. Circumstances are temporary, shifting, reactive. Faith is eternal, creative, initiating. By giving more weight to the inner hearing than to the outer condition, you tip the balance of creation. The unseen begins to push through the seen, and what was once only a whisper in silence becomes the tangible expression of your life. To hold to faith is to cultivate patience, not as waiting in uncertainty, but as resting in certainty. You do not wait for proof, you live in proof inwardly. You do not postpone joy, you hear joy now within. You do not delay gratitude, you give thanks now as though it were already accomplished. And this inner hearing, faithfully repeated, faithfully accepted, faithfully believed, becomes the seed from which experience grows. Faith is not fragile. It does not depend on mood or chance. It is the steady inner hearing of truth, unshaken by appearances, untouched by contradiction. The more you practice it, the stronger it becomes. The more you listen to the silent voice of fulfillment, the less the outer noise can disturb you. And in this way, what you once considered impossible gradually becomes inevitable, for faith has already heard it as real. The self as the source, the silence of your true self is not a retreat from life, but the fountain of all creation. Discover it, and you discover that you are the source. The world often teaches that power lies outside of you, in institutions, in circumstances, in the approval of others. From childhood, you are trained to look outward, to search for validation, to depend on conditions, to chase after security. Yet, when you pause long enough to enter the silence of self, you find that creation does not begin in the outer world at all. It begins in you. The self is not the surface personality, the shifting roles you play, or the collection of memories you carry. Those are garments worn for a time, reflections of deeper assumptions. The true self is the awareness that precedes them all. It is the silent presence that says, "I am." Before you can call yourself anything, strong, weak, poor, wealthy, loved, or unloved, there is the fact of being itself. This I am is not small, not conditional, not dependent. It is the source, the fountain from which every state flows. To retreat into this silence is not to abandon life, but to rediscover it. Many imagine that silence means withdrawal, that turning inward is escape. But the silence of the true self is not a cave where one hides. It is the well from which creation is drawn. In that silence, you feel the raw potential of being infinite and unformed. When you clothe it with an assumption, when you say, I am this or I am that, the silent self shapes reality accordingly. You are always drawing from the fountain, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Every experience you call life is the outflow of assumptions once made in silence. The job you hold, the relationships you experience, the conditions of your body and environment, all trace back to inner states you once accepted as true. The self as source is not merely an idea, it is the law of existence. The outer is always an echo of the inner. To change the echo, you must change the source. To discover the self as source is to realize that you need not wait for conditions to shift before you assume a new reality. You assume first, and the conditions follow. This is why silence is so vital. It is in silence that you meet yourself without distraction, without the endless noise of the senses. In silence, you remember that the creative power is not somewhere distant, but resting within you quietly, steadily, eternally. You do not need to beg it, you do not need to chase it, you do not need to fear its absence. You need only to recognize it. And when you do, you see that you are not a fragment tossed about by forces beyond your control. You are the fountain, and from you flows the stream of experience. To live from this recognition is to reclaim authorship of your life. Instead of saying, I am what the world made me, you begin to say, the world is what I have assumed myself to be. The shift may feel subtle at first, but it is profound. Suddenly you are not reacting to conditions. You are creating them. You are not chasing after reflections. You are shaping the face that produces them. The self as source means that nothing is truly withheld from you, except what you withhold from yourself by refusing to assume it. The fountain of creation never runs dry. No matter how much you draw from it, no matter how many states you pass through, the silence of self remains infinite. At any moment, you can return to it and assume anew. The past does not bind the source. The future does not limit it. The source is always now, always fresh, always ready to flow in the direction you choose. This is why transformation is always possible, why renewal is always available, why hope is never in vain. The self as source is eternal, untouched by the shadows it casts. When you understand this, you stop looking outward for permission to be. You stop waiting for circumstances to tell you who you are. You stop chasing after recognition, because you realize that recognition begins within. If you assume yourself to be worthy, the world will reflect worthiness. If you assume yourself to be loved, the world will reflect love. If you assume yourself to be capable, the world will reflect capability. But the fountain flows only in the direction of the state you accept. If you assume lack, lack must flow. If you assume limitation, limitation must appear. The source does not judge, it simply expresses. This realization carries a responsibility. To discover that the self is the source is to see that you cannot blame conditions, people, or chance. What you meet in life is your own assumption mirrored back. This is not a burden, but a liberation. If the self is the source, then change does not require waiting for outer forces. It requires turning inward, entering the silence, and drawing from the fountain anew. You are never without the power to assume, never without the ability to create, never without access to the source. The silence of self is not a retreat, not an absence, not a void. It is the living heart of creation, the wellspring of all you will ever experience. To discover it is to awaken to your own authorship. To drink from it is to realize that everything you seek outwardly already flows inwardly. And as you rest in this silence, as you claim your assumptions, as you listen to the deep, I am, within, you find that the world itself begins to bend, reflect, and echo the fountain that is you. So I invite you today, step into that silence. Listen deeply, assume bravely, create boldly, for within you lies a silent force waiting to speak your world into being. Thank you.